Hi everyone, this is Adam Price.
And Emily Jane Acree.
And you're listening to the Relative Rhythms Podcast.
We are thrilled to introduce to you our first guest, Sandra Kluge.
Sandra is a German-born, Brooklyn-based recording artist, percussionist, vocalist, composer, and educator. She was one of the first people we reached out to because we were struck by how she specifically defines herself as a tap percussionist, which we talk about at length in this conversation.
She has released 2 singles, and this past year she premiered an original composition commissioned by the International Contemporary Ensemble.
Sandra performs throughout New York City, both as a leader and as a freelance percussionist. She has toured with her music across Europe, including dates at the Chameleon Jazz Bar in Bremen, Germany, and the Festival Musique d'Improviser in Lausanne, Switzerland.
We talked to her about her approach to tap as a musical instrument, composition, recording, and education. We are grateful to her for our many conversations about these topics and for being our very first guest. Please welcome Sandra Kluge.
Hi, Sandra. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Emily and Adam. Thank you.
Hi.
As just a kind of like introduction to our listeners, could you give us a kind of superhero backstory? How did you come to your art form, and when did you kind of start to decide to go down it as a career path?
Sure. I'll try to keep this short, as these things usually can go on forever. So I'm Sandra Kluge, and I started tap dancing when I was 10. I come from a musician's family, and my mom has been tap dancing for 45 years at this point. And I always used to find it annoying when she was just doing what tap dancers do. It's just tap her feet randomly when she was waiting for something. And then one day I was like, oh, maybe this is kind of cool to make music with your feet. And then I asked her if she could show me the first steps. And then from there, it all just kind of took on a life of its own. Where I grew up, there weren't any tap classes to take. So she took me to workshops, and I studied with a bunch of different people. And I still remember when I was 15 was the point where it was I can't imagine doing anything else. There's nothing else in the world that excites me as much as this. So this is what I'm going to be doing. And yeah, I feel so I now call myself a tap percussionist, and I have been for a few years. I went through different iterations of tap dance musician, and then it was oh, tap percussionist kind of sounds who I am. And that journey really started with me moving to New York, and then starting to write my own music and do all the music stuff related to tap. So that's kind of the short form of the origin story.
Was your mom also kind of on that path? You said she was a musician, or your family was musicians. Did she approach the dance as a musician, or was that a shift that you made intentionally?
I think she definitely does in a way. But I think what I do now was definitely a shift that I made intentionally that grew over time.
You said you call yourself a tap percussionist. How would you distinguish that from a tap dancer?
So I've done a lot of thinking of this. And to me, it's so many things, language is so unimportant and so important at the same time. And so even before I consciously had this whole tap as a music instrument thing going on with myself, I always was kind of almost offended when somebody was oh, so you're tap dancing to this song, or oh, you look so good when you tap, or something like that. And I was how, you're not gonna walk up to a drummer and be oh, that was nice how you played along to this song at your concert, or oh, it looks so good whenever you lift your arm to hit the snare drum or something. And so I would say that's kind of the first thing of just having the language of I'm a percussionist with my feet. I don't dance to music, I play music. I don't choreograph, I compose. I think like every other musician, Please don't underestimate my abilities of knowing music just because I have tap shoes. And often there's like a little bit of a stigma around, like, just like with singers, I think, where it's like there's enough examples of tap dancers not knowing forms and not knowing what they're doing and not being able to distinguish eighth notes from 16th notes that, like, I want to break that because I feel like there can be a lot in a name. Um, and I also felt like I wasn't really doing service to the dance part. Because, like, the way that I see tap is really like a spectrum with, like, music or sound on one side and movement on the other side. And, like, because tap is such an inclusive art form and so eclectic, everybody is like on a different part of that spectrum. And so, like, because I was never interested in like having some kind of theatrical aspect or like looking a certain way or like expressing things in this more like movement based vocabulary, that I was like, I don't feel like a dancer. I've never taken ballet or anything else. I'm not interested in it. I think it's great. Like, I love seeing it. I love when people are super invested, but that's not me. Like, I'm just a musician with my feet. So I was like, I can't call myself a dancer. Like, I'm not gonna get hired for any dance gigs, and so why should I call myself a tap dancer when, like, being a tap musician or tap percussionist feels so much more like what I'm doing. And I think it also, when when people meet me and they're like, oh, so what do you do? And they're like, I'm a tap percussionist. It usually, like, either they understand it immediately. They're like, oh, so tap, oh, percussion, oh, okay, I get it. Or it starts a conversation of me being able to explain it and then being like, okay, yeah, so I'm not tap dancing on Broadway. I'm like doing this very different thing.
I think that's awesome to be able to know yourself too. Not that anything doing tap or participating in tap on the other end of the spectrum, like you said, is anything wrong with that, but knowing yourself and where you want to live and where you already naturally are inclined, I think is so important for all of us to get to, no matter where we are on the music or dance or theater spectrum. It's really cool.
Absolutely. I think especially for an art form like tap dance, I think we as participants in the art form need to be really intentional about what this is and the context that it is in, because there's so much of, like, dance departments often don't feel responsible, music departments often don't feel responsible for, and it's always this, like, we have to claim our territory. And so I think no matter where somebody falls on the spectrum, they just need to be really clear about it and be like, this is the place that I belong in. And truly, some people in the tap world, I think, fit really well into a dance department and can share that aspect of the art form beautifully. And then some others really have their space in the music world. And the more clear we are as participants, I think the better we can also serve this art form.
I tend to, here I go. I tend to not like the differentiations in terms of, like, a lot of times, especially at a studio level, you'll be like, oh, well, I do Broadway tap or I do rhythm tap. And my answer to that is we have the same shoes with the same four plates on them. And the technique, we're all doing shuffles and flaps, and the basics are all there. So, when somebody says, well, aren't you a rhythm tap dancer? Don't you teach a rhythm class? Or don't you, oh, you used to do musical theater. Don't you teach Broadway tap? I'm like, I don't like that differentiation, because I like to say that I teach tap and you can have your own, like, your own leanings, right? Some people are going to be more musical theater with it, or some people are going to be, worry less about how it appears and focus more on how it sounds. So I tend to not like that differentiation. But the way you're saying it makes a lot of sense. So how do you, when people ask you that question, do you have a response?
Yeah, I think um as with so many things in the tap world, I feel like these labels carry so many
Yeah.
associations with them, and
Yeah.
like oh, being a Broadway tap dancer means this, and or can mean this and this and this, and like that's the story of that, and like being a rhythm tap dancer means this and this and this. So I think it's important to have the awareness that there are distinctions in the same way that like there are distinctions in every art form. Like I don't I'm just giving an example of like what I'm practicing right now on piano. Like you can practice like stride piano, or you could practice like classical piano technique. Like it's all there are going to be distinctions, and I think it's important to have the awareness. And if you're looking to take a class that's more Broadway style, I think it definitely makes sense to know, like, some teachers are going to be able to give you that, some teachers are not. Or if you're interested in deepening your musicality, some teachers may not dive as deeply into that as others. So yeah, I think the distinction makes sense. Sometimes the judgments and the associations that we carry with them might not make as much sense. Where like it's not a difference in quality; it's just a difference in how we use the same tool.
You were mentioning how you kind of get offended when people have a certain preconception of what you do as a tap dancer. And you also mentioned about how certain approaches to tap don't really fit in with certain like higher ed spaces. And so I'm wondering, have you gotten any pushback from the dance community in the way you approach tap dance?
I wouldn't say pushback yet. I think most often in certain dance spaces, people just don't really understand, or they don't really want to understand because they have such a preconceived notion of what tap is that they're not really able to really see what I'm doing, especially when it's like in environments where I'm providing a service, and like certain teaching environments where like they are used to tap dancers approaching things in a certain way and like have some kind of maybe more theatrical component in their teaching. And then like I come in, I'm like, okay, kids, let's write down eighth note triplets. There's different kinds of triplets, all that stuff. So yeah, I can't think of any pushback yet, but definitely it's like sometimes it takes more effort to explain to people, and sometimes they never understand, and then at the end of the thing they're still like, oh, that looked really good.
And we just say thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, have you gotten any, I know there's a lot of preconceived notions of tap dancers in music spaces. Have you gotten a lot of pushback from musicians?
That's an interesting one, because I feel like part of my whole journey of like becoming or growing into calling myself a tap percussionist was also a little bit egotistical and a little bit out of just like this personal, like, I don't want to go to jam sessions anymore and feel like I need to explain what I'm doing or feel like I'm somehow inferior in my knowledge. I think that's really one of the big things that started this whole thing, just like this level of frustration of like I want to feel like I'm equal to these musicians, but there are certain things that just seem a little bit like a mystery to me, and so I just want to sit down and like get all my practice hours in to feel like I'm an equal. So I think in that sense, I definitely experienced some positive pushback in a way where I never like in like an impolite way or something, but just people being very clear about like, look, like it might be helpful for you to look into this and practice this and just get more of an understanding of a jazz form or something. And so that really propelled me to be like, okay, I gotta I got to work on this so that I can truly, genuinely feel like I know what I'm doing and not just be like, oh yeah, I make music with my feet. And then I sit there and I'm like intruding on everybody else's solo or something.
So when you go into, say now, when you go into a jam setting situation, I mean, obviously you have this whole breadth of knowledge now that you bring with you and you're approaching it as a percussionist. Does that shift how you walk up to the band? Like, are you saying, I'd like to be a percussionist? How do you enter in that way so that they have a shift of what to expect from you as well, as opposed to being like, oh, she's just going to solo over everybody and here we go. Yeah.
Definitely. I think now it's a combination of actions and words, depending on the general vibe of the session. Sometimes I talk to people before, and I'm like, I would prefer to not have a drum set or not have a drummer while I'm taking a tune. But honestly, most of the time, I just go on, and because I love being spontaneous and in that kind of environment, and like even if there's a drummer, it's a nice challenge for me to like fit in to and like find the frequency spectrum that I can occupy and kind of complement what's there. And I think that the just the way that I place myself into those contexts then makes the people that are sensitive and that also know what they're doing realize, oh yeah, she's like she also has the same sensibility, and like they can feel the difference, um, uh, especially if they've had other experiences with tap dancers before, that they're like, oh yeah, this actually was different. And then usually afterwards I talk with them and then like set up sessions privately to like be really specific about the environment that the music making happens. But yeah, I've definitely been able to notice a shift in that since I've gotten really clear about who I am and what this is that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I'm just kind of starting this journey, right? Working with Adam. And so um I always have imposter syndrome, and I almost have it more, the more you know, the more you don't know. And so it is kind of that moment of, uh, that's always a vulnerable place to put yourself in anyway. And now it's like even more so because I'm trying to be super intentional with how I approach it. And yeah, it's scary for me still. So it's inspiring to hear, how you approach it and where you've been able to fit in and things. So
And I
it's
definitely
awesome.
know how you feel. I have felt that, still sometimes feel that same imposter syndrome. Um, but yeah, I think the more, as with everything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become, and like the experience kind of creates the confidence, um, and also not only being specific about kind of the more macro of like what tap means to you, but then also the more micro. And like I talk about this a lot and could talk about this for 2 days straight, but uh, when being in like jam sessions or playing with other musicians, to also have this distinction between am I soloing or am I accompanying, and um, what's my role in the ensemble. I think exploring that specifically also is really helpful to gaining that confidence in claiming your territory and knowing what is your territory and what is not.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, that's huge. Um, and that takes a lot of self-awareness. Do you enjoy, now that you have all this knowledge and all this practice and all this experience, do you enjoy going into these musician spaces and breaking the stereotype?
Yes, very much so.
The smile.
Yes.
Um, and how do you share these ideas with your own students, if you do at all?
I do with pretty much all my students. Right now, I'm teaching people from like age 6 to, I don't know, the adults of any kind. So there's definitely I'm not walking into my classroom of 6-year-old students and be like, all right, guys, today we're working on metric modulation. Um, but
Start them young.
exactly. It's like, we'll start not in 4/4. Let's dive right into 7/8. Practice shuffles in 7/8. Why not? But I can't help being myself, and so I think in any teaching environment it's gonna show in some way, whether that is, and I do start pretty young with like having an awareness of subdivisions and knowing what you're doing, not just thinking like, oh, I can do a shuffle technically and so I know what a shuffle is, but also being like, well, can you play a shuffle as a quarter note or as an eighth note or as a 16th note? So I think most of the time, like 99% of the time, those concepts are a pretty big part of my teaching practice. And of course, I always try to be sensitive about where I'm teaching and kind of the expectations of the students or the organization that I'm teaching for. And like, I know not everybody needs the full dose of music theory in a class. But I always try to give them something, even if it's just the idea of like, let's feel the bass groove, and like that's not going to change even if like the notes that we're playing are faster than that. So yeah, and I think I'm more and more also accepting that that is a big part of my artistic practice, and so it will also be a big part of my teaching practice, and that like truly some spaces might not be for me anymore because there are certain expectations of covering other areas of tap that if I really forced myself to, I could give them, but I won't feel good about it, and I would feel like somebody else could really take the space up much better than I do right now. So yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had some questions about how you approach the education as well, and it is, I think there's, especially in like a traditional studio setting, there's just not enough anywhere. There's just not enough time in a day. There's not enough time in a lesson, and like you said, tap spans this whole history and scale of different, including different things, and it's hard to feel like, I have a hard time feeling like I'm doing anything justice, honestly. Like, you teach a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but then it, yeah, it doesn't feel like you're really doing a great service to any of it. So I think getting to a point where you're like, this is how I teach, and that's okay, and if you don't want me, that's okay. um do you specify that going into situations, or you feel like if they found you, they know who you are, basically?
I started to be more specific about that. Like now, when I reach out to people, or they approach me, I usually tell them like these are my specialties, and then when they ask more, like I tell them more. And it can also be scary because it's like some might turn me down and some might be like, oh, we're actually looking for a different thing. And I think in like a broader sense of it, I'm trying to be more courageous with that and know that if this is not what they want, then it's not my place to be in, and I'm saving myself the time and the space to actually be in a place that I can freely share what my approach to this art form is, and not have to like censor myself or be somebody that I'm not. I've
Yeah,
had enough experiences of that, I think, now. So yeah, work in progress on that for sure.
for sure. Yeah, all of us, I think, for sure. Do you want to share a little bit about some of the projects you've been doing? You've got 2 singles out now, maybe more to come.
Definitely more to come. Yeah, hopefully this year there will be some
Oh,
more
nice. Oh, that's
releases.
exciting.
When's the full album dropping?
As soon as possible. It's there's some logistical financial components in there. But yeah, I think upcoming, this, I haven't shared this publicly yet, and this is going to be a great accountability for me. But I'm planning to release another single at some point this year, date TBD.
Nice.
And then I also want to release a beat tape.
Oh, cool.
Which this has been one of my many, many, many different projects that's been around in my head at all times, which is the idea of sampling my taps for beats and then soloing over them. So like basically creating my own sample kits
Cool.
that give me different shades of taps. And right now I'm like diving super deeply into mixing and all the producing stuff, which like I have been doing that since I started making music with this. But I feel like now I want to like actually release something, and I want to feel like I know what I'm doing. So I'm like watching these like 10-hour videos
Gosh.
on just compression on YouTube. It's great. Can't get more nerdy than that.
Yep, rabbit holes, baby.
Yep. Oh yeah. But yeah, so that's a plan for some time this year to come
That's
out with a
awesome.
beat tape. And yeah, really, I mean, generally, the projects that I'm working on are all centered around composing and producing and just creating these contexts for tap percussion to sound the way that I want it to sound, and to really have it be something that is very accessible to people. Because I think for me, one of the big parts of why the sound component of this is the most important for me is that people can just listen to it anywhere. They can pull up the single, put their phone in their pocket, and listen to it on their drive to work or on their way to something, or really wherever they are. And this idea of like being a part of somebody's life soundtrack is one of the most gratifying things, because I know that so many artists are part of my life soundtrack. And let's say I'm about to go into a challenging situation, or like I'm like any feeling state, there's going to be a playlist and artists associated with that. And I think in a larger sense, I want to be a part of hopefully somebody's playlist of some kind.
That's awesome. You definitely have been a part of mine, so.
Yeah, for sure. Can we listen to one of your tracks?
Sure.
This is the Relative Rhythms podcast, and you're listening to our conversation with tap percussionist Sandra Kluge. This project is a labor of love, and we are currently funded entirely by our listeners. If you'd like to support our work, you can do so through our Patreon, where you can find extra content and listen to the full uncut interviews. Go to patreon.com/relative rhythms to subscribe and support our work. If you like this episode, share it with a friend and help us spread the word. Please give us a follow and leave a review wherever you are listening. Thanks for tuning in, and now back to our conversation with Sandra.
Yeah. So what's up? That was
I
great.
love that one.
Thank you.
So I understand that all the percussion in that track was done by your feet, correct?
Correct.
So the bass drum, all the brushwork, everything.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's really impressive how it doesn't really sound like tap. It's mixed really well, and the way you're able to get the different frequencies, the different tones for the different drums, if you will, it's really, really cool. How do you do that?
Yes.
How do you record your taps first off, and how do you get those different frequencies to sound the way they do with your feet?
Yes, I love talking about this. Okay, here we go. So over the time, so I even though like my music journey in tap has been going on for a little longer, when I started recording stuff, that was like 2018. Yeah, end of like 2018. So I've gone through a few different iterations of how I record my taps. And depending on the effect that I want to create, I still use a few different ones. But for this kind of thing where like I really want the kick and the snare and everything to be really distinctly audible, I approach it like a drum set. So of course, with tap shoes and the board, we have the challenge of whereas we can mic each drum on a drum kit separately, with tap, it's like having one drum where the entire frequency spectrum is happening on the same surface. And so what I do is deconstruct the bass groove, the main accompanying groove, into the different parts. So I record the kick separately. I record or I call them kick and snare. Like, so all the different parts, I record them separately in stereo so that I can pan them and then create that sense of fullness. And then I can EQ them separately. I can treat them separately and really make them stand out. Now, with Clementine, I definitely have to give a lot of credit to my mixing engineer for that, Ryan Power, who did an awesome job, because I was telling him like I want the kick to be super punchy and like really make it sound like a drum set. And I'm like practicing how to really do this myself. So yeah, the way that I do it from my own process is I then have all these separate tracks: my kick drum, my snare drum, my hi-hat, whatever else extra I have tracks. And then I mean, most of it is just compression and EQing and some directions and maybe like a little bit of bass amp stuff for the kick drum. But I try to keep it I try to keep the production simple and not put like a bunch of effects on it or something, because I'm a purist in that sense, where I still want everything to be generated by the taps. And yeah, that's the process for something like Clementine.
That's awesome.
When you're recording these things, are you're separating out the different, like the bass drum and the snare and all these sounds? So you're basically multi-tracking your taps
Mm-hmm.
rather than creating one like choreographed groove almost.
Yeah, it's to me it feels a little bit like playing with a drum machine.
Mm-hmm.
Where you can, adjust all the different sounds separately and kind of just put them in separate places on the grid. I have these core grooves that I as I said, like I think like a drummer, and so like I have these like, like eighth note feel core groove, 16th note feel core groove, swing groove core groove, like whatever. And so those don't change that much. Um, and I find that this way of recording, as you kind of touched upon, there is this kind of challenge of not being that flexible in like improvising within it. Um, and so what I usually do to make it feel more organic is that I multi-track all the different parts separately, and then I have one more track where I record them all together um, to create more fatness and also have just a little more of that organic feel in it, but still have that kind of distinction.
Cool.
So, could you do them all together or no?
I could do them all together.
Oh, okay. So it's not that you're composing, excuse me, composing separate things. You could actually perform those all together if you needed to.
Most of the time, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, it's interesting. I guess as you were talking, I was imagining they were totally separate I mean, dances, which is, I know you, sorry.
All
That
good.
they wouldn't be able to be put back together then because they were so separate.
Mm-hmm.
But it's cool that you could do it all together. I think that's really neat.
Most of the time, yeah. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I'm trying to honestly, like the rhythmic composition is the most challenging for me, just because it is so intuitive for me. Like my stuff usually starts with like a harmony based idea. Um, but I do try to play more around with that now, where I layer things that I can't do all at the same time, which is kind of fun. And of course, like doing some really intricate polyrhythmic structures. Some of them are not humanly possible to do. Maybe Max Paula can do them all at the same
Maybe,
time,
yeah.
but yeah, but most of them, like the core grooves, of course I do a lot of like overdubbing. Like I can't do the taps and the sand at the same time,
Right.
but the core grooves usually are their own thing that when I play these things live, I do at the same time.
That's awesome.
So you have played these live.
Yeah.
Nice. How do you do the rest of the music outside of the percussion?
So there's a few different ways that I do it. So what I've been doing most often recently is play solo with my loop station, which allows me to layer different tracks. And for a while, I worked a lot with like having parts of the song sampled in my loop station so that I don't have to spend like 5 minutes to build everything at once. I have now kind of changed my set where I try to play everything live, which is a little bit nerve wracking as I grow in my piano capabilities, but definite growth there. But then, like Clementine, I actually don't often play solo just because there's so many different layers of it, and there's the whole string part and everything. I don't really like the feeling of like playing along to a track. But for example, Misty Rose, my other release, I basically, of course, it's not going to sound like the studio recording, but the synth part, the tap parts are all played live, the vocal stuff. But yeah, like Clementine, I usually do when I do a band thing, because then I can outsource a few of the parts.
So you have hired bands for gigs.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
How often is it just you, and how often do you like have a band behind you?
Right now I would say 90% of the time it's solo, 10% of the time it's band. Also just because of playing solo is always easier. Um, I do want to do more band stuff and just like more collaborative stuff. It's it's easy for me to just do everything myself. But yeah, I think for me it's also though when I play with other people that um I'm almost more interested in an improvised exchange. Like I love playing duo with people because it offers so many possibilities, and like my own compositions almost feel so personal that I want to be in charge of all the different aspects of it. Um so for like upcoming band stuff, which are like a bunch of other projects that I need to get started or want to get started. I want to just create like a separate body of music that feels like it will be served by other people playing it and not just me myself.
It might change your compositional approach too, I imagine, if you're writing for a band versus writing for yourself.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Because right now I'm still working with the limitations that I have. Like I always tell people like I do happen to sing and play a lot of piano in my stuff, but I would not call myself a singer or a piano player. Like don't hire me for gigs to play piano. Like I will not do a great job. So of course working with a band I won't have the limitations because I know people know they have the same standard that I have in my tap percussion, and we can actually make it grow, which is like that's exciting because that can take the music to such different places.
Would you would you be interested in, when you talk about composing for a band setting, would that ever include additional percussion that may be served by additional tap percussionists if there were people that were interested in that? Or is that something that...
Is Emily trying to get hired? Is that what you're trying to hustle a gig in?
No, I cannot hang. Let me just say, cannot hang. Still gonna get with you for private lessons, Sandra. Cannot hang. But I don't want to say tap dancers. There's 100 tap dancers out there, but right, and I don't want to be like, oh well, you wouldn't want to work with people. I don't want it to sound negative, right? But obviously they would have to have the same approach that you did to be able to work successfully together. But is that something like you dream of, or this is not really something you're super interested in at the moment?
I'm actually working on a project right now that explores exactly that.
Amazing.
I feel very fortunate to be an artist in residence at the American Tap Dance Foundation this year, which allows me weekly studio space to explore. And it's like I want to use that space to kind of dive into, also for me to like practice percussive composition really, and to translate the things that I record myself into my DAW, like all just like layers of me and me and me. It's like how can I translate that to other people so that it can become more of a live experience. So that's been a really interesting journey because again, like to me, the way I approach it, it does not feel like choreographing, and I do not want it to feel like choreographing. right now it's like a work in progress experimental piece that hopefully at some point will be like a 45-60 minute larger work.
That's
um
awesome.
but it was interesting because there are some like unison moments in there where it's like we gotta all use the same footwork and like already
Mm.
creating these like 4 8 bar little things. I was like, oh, like this almost feels like choreography. Like this does not feel like
Right.
what I want to do.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but it's been cool. I feel like together with the people that I'm collaborating with, it's been a nice um, exploration of how I can broaden my approach and strike that balance between working with set grooves but also having the improvised sensibility um, around it. And it's been cool. I've had like a few iterations of playing around with that, but I was I think I wasn't really able to communicate with myself and with the other people that were in the room really what I wanted, because it already felt like such a distinct thing that I had with just myself, so that I didn't really know what I needed the other people there for in the room.
What are you
Um,
here for?
yeah, exactly. Why did I call you? Um, but yeah, it's been a really interesting and rewarding and gratifying process. But of course, as you were just kind of trying to be kind in the way that you express it, um, it definitely like the people that I work with, definitely I require for them to have a certain sensibility,
Hmm.
and it's honestly hard to find people that not only have the technical capabilities and the improvisational capabilities, but also that sensibility for sound and tone and texture and being able to contribute to the music, not by thinking of like, oh, what step do I usually feel like doing in this, but like, what does the music need? Even if that just means me staying in heel drops for 2 minutes, like that. That is like, and I know that that can be hard, and like sometimes I feel like, oh, if I hire other people to do this thing, like they're gonna be so bored because most of what I do is just like heels and toes.
Yeah, yeah, it's a totally different approach, and I think it's different too. I know you were saying how interested you were in the recording aspect of it and being able to put something out there in the world that people can take with them. And when you work and you can do all that because you have all that time, right? You can create all these different tracks. But when you work with other people and if you're potentially creating a live performance opportunity for people to experience in that time, it's like a fine line, I feel like, of creating the music and also having to worry about the visual because they are watching you,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So is there a way you walk that line, or you just don't worry about it? Hand out
I
blindfolds on the way.
I think I just try to not care about it because I truly like I don't know. There's definitely a part of me that's just like egotistical and it's just like, yeah, that's just how I feel. Like it does not matter how other people feel. But I so often when I'm at a concert catch myself not looking at the people that are playing because I it's such a different experience from looking at it and hearing it versus just like really hearing it and letting the music come into your body and your cells and everything. Um, so I think, and again, this is a lot of like this overarching theme of my work of creating contexts for tap to be understood in a certain way. Um, that I think the way I try to set it up is so that people, even if they start watching it and expecting, oh, I'm going to be entertained and there's going to be a visual aspect, to not give them that, but still have something else for them to latch onto so that they don't get bored and like leave the room. Um, so yeah, I think ultimately I just I just try to stay true to this notion of like, well, a drummer is still moving, and if you wanted to, you could watch a drummer as you would do a ballet dancer, because like they have their movement, like it looks really cool.
It
Or like
does.
you could watch Keith Jarrett play, and it's like a whole performance. Um, and it's very obvious with tap percussion, of course, but it's not the only thing. And I'm hoping that just with the things that I create, the way that I created, the kinds of context um, that I set for tap, that it will be kind of self-explanatory. Hopefully, you never know how people take things, and like,
Right. Well, and
um,
that's not your
yeah,
job either to worry about the way they take it. You create your art, and it's there for the world, for the people who want it and appreciate it and enjoy it.
yeah, that is true, definitely. But I think it's definitely a challenge because especially in the beginning of my journey in as a tap percussionist, I thought a lot about stage setup too, because let's say you have like a full stage that's full of wood, there is all this empty room of possibility that will carry a certain expectation to fill that room. Um, and so part of why I work on just a 2x2 board, not just because it really just makes me like that's all I need for what I do, but it also sets up a different expectation, I hope, in the audience of like, oh, that's like where her instrument is. That's her drum. That's that's where it happens and nothing else. So it's definitely a little bit intimidating to think about having this like multi-tap percussionist work be on a bigger stage. And I'm not quite sure yet how just stage setup wise I would approach it. Like maybe still have separate boards or something. Um, but yeah, that's all to be explored.
It's exciting.
I am like stopping myself from like saying, "Oh, I can't wait to watch it." Sorry.
I mean, it will be something to watch. Like it's I don't like I don't want to pull a Savion and just like do a show in complete darkness, even though I think that's really really cool too. I think the visual is still a part of it, and like that's why we all love tap, because it is, you use your body to make sound. It's one of the cooler things in life. But I just want to get the shift away from like 90% looking, 10% listening to like 90% listening, 10% looking.
I mean, I feel like I could keep talking to you about all of this. um, and your approach is so interesting, and I think I think it's inspirational in a totally different way. I had my like tap heroes growing up, and it was definitely 90% watching and 10% listening for sure. So it's cool to, as I'm making this shift, find people in the community who are, you know, just doing the thing and being so awesome about it. So thank you for yeah, for being a person in the community that's like talking about it. And um yeah, I think, I work with Heather, and I know you've worked with Heather, and she's such an inspiration to me. And, she says it's a whole shift that has to happen in the culture. And it just takes each of us doing just a little bit in our communities and helping our communities and our direct connections make that shift for themselves and understand the whys, and and that it's something so cool and so beautiful and so maybe different than your expectation, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think it all comes down to mindfulness, no matter what you want to nurture in your community. Um, whether it be like the whole music and movement thing, whether it be carrying on the awareness of history,
Hmm.
while also knowing your place in it and how you can advance the art form and not falling into the trap of getting stuck in the past. So I think there's a whole lot of things to be much more mindful about than I think a lot of people are. And I always think about it in terms of like what do I contribute to the art form, and how do I elevate the art form? And my way to elevate the art, like I would not serve the art form, and that's just like my own personal way to that I feel about it. I would not be able to elevate the art form if I just choose like a song that I like and then tap dance over it and then like perform it at a dance showcase or something. Some people might feel like that's genuinely how they express themselves, and I think that's great. But I think being mindful about what it is that truly connects you to the art form and makes you the best vessel for it, without wanting to get too spiritual about it. But
I like it.
I think that's the thing that everybody needs to be aware of. It's like, why am I doing this thing? It is such a specific thing, and I think if you do something and you're not really sure why, that's just something to look at.
Words of wisdom in all aspects.
In
of
all
our
aspects.
lives.
Beautifully put.
Art and life are mirroring each other.
Sandra, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you guys so much. I feel honored to be the first one.
Sometimes there's something inside me that wonders what could have been if I had said something.
Thanks for listening to our conversation with Sandra Kluge. If you'd like to learn more about Sandra's music and work, you can go to sandrakluge.com and follow her at sandra.kluge on Instagram.
You can also support her on Patreon, where she offers exclusive music and education that includes music theory, exercises, tap technique, and private coaching opportunities. Check the program notes for all of the links.
The mid-roll music was Sandra's single, Clementine, and our outro music is her single, Misty Rose.
Our brand new opening theme song, For the Love of It, was composed by Adam Price, and we are deeply grateful to John Bell for the production help and mixing it just in time for this episode.
If you'd like to support our podcast, you can find us on Patreon as well, where you can listen to the full, unedited interviews. Thank you for joining us for our very first guest, and please reach out to us and let us know what you think. Feel free to email us or send us a message on Instagram at Relative Rhythms or through our website, relativerhythms.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share, subscribe, and leave us a review.
Thanks for listening, and we'll leave you in the capable hands
And feet.
of Sandra Kluge.
See you next episode.